Welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us for the Kansas City Public Library's program Step by Step through the FAFSA with Jason Anderson from GradMetrics. We're so excited that you're here tonight, Jason, to chat with us about the FAFSA and give us an in-depth look at how we can move through it, some tips and tricks, and really just make the most of funding that's available for students who are looking to go to college.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me go ahead and get my PowerPoint shared with you all here, and we'll get this started. But it's really great to be here with you all. I do these presentations for several libraries, and I really love it because it's such an important topic. I don't care where you're at on the income spectrum or the asset spectrum. I work with families that have lots of assets, lots of income. I work with families that don't have a lot of income and assets. And the great thing about the FAFSA is, like I said, regardless of where you fall there, this is the opportunity to get free and subsidized aid from the government to go to college. It's no lie that college expenses are incredible. I work with lots of families and discuss what it costs for college. And they're like, did I just wake up 30 years? Like, what happened to the costs of college? It's skyrocketed through the roof. And so many families look at college and they say, how can I do this? And one of the ways that you can do this is through the government's help, through the free application for federal student aid, which is the FAFSA. The thing that is kind of a stickler for some families, though, is that it's a difficult form to really digest and to think through and to reason through. It feels a lot like a tax form for people. And so they get really scared when they hear the word FAFSA. Some, unfortunately, even decide to not fill it out at all, which in my opinion is a huge mistake. And so hopefully the goal of this presentation is that you're going to get to the end of it and you're going to say, hey, I now know how to do the FAFSA. And it's not mysterious to me anymore. And a lot of that fear hopefully just flies away. And so that's my goal is, and I am a professor, which actually goes to my next slide. So I do love walking people through that, where you get that kind of bright idea or that light bulb that goes on in your brain that says, yes, I've got this. So hopefully you'll be at that place when we get to the end of this presentation. Here's my disclaimer, though. I am a professor for the University of Kansas. I'm on faculty is what I should say. I'm a lecturer is my rank. And so I do like to say at this point that I wear two hats in life. And one is my University of Kansas hat as a lecturer in the School of Business. And the other hat that I wear is helping families through the college planning process. And I specifically do that through a company that I founded to make things more affordable for families looking for that type of help, called GradMetrics. And so I am wearing that GradMetrics hat for this presentation, and the University of Kansas hasn't endorsed to review that type of thing. So that's my disclaimer. All right, so the agenda for today, what are we going to talk about? The first is financial aid. So we need to get a 30,000-foot view of what is financial aid, what does it mean to get financial aid to go to college. Then we're going to do a general overview of the FAFSA, and then we're going to actually walk through the FAFSA line by line. And so again, hopefully at the end of this presentation, you'll say, aha, I've got this. It's not as complicated as I thought it was, and I'm going to go ahead and fill it out. Because if you have a senior, the FAFSA is actually open for you right now, or if you're an adult learner, things like that. So financial aid. Financial Aid 101. So what's offered for a family to go to college? And we're framing everything here in terms of the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. And so what can you get? Families have that legitimate question. And so what you can get is free money. And this is no strings attached to money per se. There are always some strings attached. But this is money that you don't have to pay back to the government. So this might include things, and you don't have to worry about the terminology at this point, but things like a Pell Grant or a Teach Grant. That's for people going off to go to be teachers. That's money that if you do certain things, it doesn't have to be paid back. And there's some other ones too that may not be as well known as some of these, like the Pell Grant and the Teach Grant. You might get scholarships. And so one of the things about the free application for federal student aid is you fill it out, but you're actually filling that out to send this information to the schools that are on your school list that you're interested in going to. So maybe you want to go to K-State or Rockhurst or KU or whatever that looks like. And so you're going to list those in the FAFSA. So they're going to get kind of a summary and an aggregate of this information that you're putting in the FAFSA. They then use that data to divvy out scholarships, to divvy out their own aid and to match maybe stuff that the government is giving you. So they use it as their own indicator, particularly about what your need is, your financial need to go to college. Do you have lots of income? Do you have little income? Do you have lots of assets, little assets? Those are the things that they're going to be looking at. Maybe they're going to give out a scholarship to a family that has a lot of financial need. They're going to probably use the FAFSA information to do that as well. You can get things like work study, which this is where the government pays for your kid to work on campus. So again, it's kind of subsidized by the government. The government is the one that's actually in the end paying that paycheck to your student. And the school is kind of facilitating that transaction through a job. And then you have loans. So this, for some families, may be the only thing that they get offered by the FAFSA, but it's still important to fill it out. And the reason is because these loans are actually being given out at historically low interest rates. I'm talking like in the 2%, which is pretty crazy to think about. If maybe you bought a home 20 years ago, and you maybe had like a 10 or a 14% interest rate or whatever that looked like, these loans are dirt cheap in terms of interest. Not only that, but the government might pay for that interest while your kid's in school, depending on what type of loan you get. And then the final piece is, well, we've already talked a little bit about the money from the government versus money from the school, but you might also, there's another pile of money out there called private scholarships. And so there are searches out there like FastWeb or scholarships.com or Peterson's, and you can do, set up a profile. You can look through scholarships there. What happens though is it tends to be a pretty small portion of the pie. When we look at where the majority of the money is coming from, it's coming from the school itself, from the government, maybe from family sources. But this private scholarships pie tends to be only maybe 2.5% to 5% of all money. But it's actually where many schools send all their students and they say, hey, set up these sites on these different websites and go find scholarships. Well, what families need to know is filling out the FAFSA and picking the right schools. That's really where the majority of the money's coming from. So this will hopefully check that box by the FAFSA to make sure you're on the right path to get some of that money. Now, when it comes to getting money from the government in terms of the FAFSA, there are some qualifications and some hurdles that you have to get over in order to get this money. The first is a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. So if you're not a U.S. citizen, there are some categories you could fit into and still get financial aid. You need to have a valid Social Security number. Registered with a selective service if you're a male between 18 and 25. You need to be enrolled or accepted to an eligible degree or certificate program, which this is a key one. Sometimes you're not eligible to get financial aid because you're not working towards a degree, you're not working towards a certificate, you're maybe just taking classes here and there. That's not the type of scenario that the government would give money towards. You have to be enrolled at least half time, so there's kind of a minimum bar of attendance and the number of classes you're taking. You have to get a high school diploma, GED, or homeschool completion type pathway. And then you have to maintain something called satisfactory academic progress. And I bolded that one in particular because this is actually defined by the school that you go to. So let's say you apply to Metropolitan Community College here in Kansas City and you get accepted, you start going. In order to keep financial aid, you have to be making progress towards whatever that degree is, whatever that certificate is. And the school defines it. And so you should know in terms of Metropolitan Community College, what's the GPA I have to keep? How many classes do I have to take? What's the progression towards my degree? What's that sequence and pace that I have to be keeping in order to remain eligible? Because some get this money, but they don't realize I do have to do that. There are things that I have to do to keep this up, to keep it maintenance. And so I throw that out there so that you're aware when you go to college, there are some kind of eligibility pieces to keep going. All right, so the programs, I mentioned Pell Grant. So Pell Grant, free money, you don't have to pay it back. You could get up to $6,195 in 1920, that academic year, in free money from the FAFSA. That's great. By the way, many students go to school 2 years, 4 years, some 5 years. And so this could be a decent chunk of money at the end of the day, right? The FSEOG, so the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, Again, free money up to $4,000 a year. Don't have to pay this back. Teach grant I had mentioned is for teachers, potential teachers, could be up to $4,000. The Iraq, and actually, sorry, this says Iran. That should be Iraq. I apologize. The Iraq and Afghanistan service grant. This is same as the Pell Grant. So it could be up to $6,195 again. Then I had mentioned, and I'll stop here and just explain this briefly, there are two types of loans: direct subsidized loans and direct unsubsidized loans. And so the difference between these two is they're both loans, money that has to be paid back. The difference is for subsidized loans, sometimes the government says, hey, we want to pay for your interest while you're in school. So that interest doesn't start accruing until you get out and you start paying on it. Direct unsubsidized loans, that interest starts to accrue immediately when you take it out. So not as good as the other loan in terms of less money that you're going to have to pay over time, but it is nice. And that all these loans, like I had mentioned earlier, are very low interest rate, actually historically low interest rates this year. And so good to have this money, regardless if it's subsidized or unsubsidized, and you would like to take that money out to go to college. And then direct plus loans. So these go to the parent. The previous two, direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans, actually go to the student. And so the student is going to be able to take out that money. Actually, it's $5,500 for the first year, $6,500 for these subsidized loans right here, $6,500 for the second year, $7,500 for subsequent years. So the student's going to get about $27,000 worth of loans if they choose to take it to go to college. What happens though is some families have more need, and so they take all, the calculation is that they take all the aid that your child, or that you, if you're an adult learner, is given to go to college, and then all colleges kind of calculate this full cost of attendance. And if you still have a gap between those two numbers, i.e. you need more money to go to college, sometimes the government will offer you what's called a direct plus loan. And so this is a loan given to the parents, and it does require a credit check and some additional qualifications, but it essentially gives you more money that you can put towards going to college. So your parents might be offered this. Again, this goes to the student. This direct plus loan goes to the parents. So if you see a direct plus loan, if you qualify for that and you see it on your financial aid letter, which is something we'll talk about here in a second, then it's to the parents. So that's an important distinguishing factor. All right, so let's talk about the FAFSA now. So we've covered financial aid. Now we need to talk about the FAFSA. The FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. There's two F's in there I want you to focus on. Number one is free. And so you shouldn't ever have to fill out the FAFSA, money to fill out the FAFSA. Actually, if you fill it out, the FAFSA, and it says, hey, now pay us, you're on the wrong website, because you shouldn't have to pay to fill out the FAFSA. The second is federal. And so federal means the federal government, right? We have governments at the federal level, the big government. We have governments at the state level. We have governments at local level, even the county level. And so this is money coming from the federal government, the big government. So if you want to be considered for aid from your actual state, for many listening to this video, it would be Missouri. But some, like I live in Kansas, you actually need to visit your state's specific entity that is over higher education, and they might have a separate application. Sometimes states accept the FAFSA as that application, and sometimes they require you to fill out a different one. And so where you'd go, like if you're in Kansas, you would go to the Kansas Board of Regents website. If you're in Missouri, I believe it's the Missouri Department of Higher Education, and they would have a separate website that would kind of tell you what their process is to get aid from the state. But those are the two I want you to remember: federal and free. All right. And the FAFSA opens October 1 every year. So another common question that I get is, how often do I have to fill it out? Well, you essentially fill it out every year for every year that you're going to be in college. And so it opens up for seniors, their senior year, October 1. So it's already open for seniors right now. And it looks like my kiddo is trying to get in here. Sorry. That happens in Zoom calls, right? So October 1 is when it opens. It would open for seniors October 1 of this year. It's already open, and they're going to be applying for that next year that they go to college. And so that's another thing to keep in mind. The free application for federal student aid is actually named after the academic year that you're going to attend school. And so for those of you that have seniors right now, you're going to be filling out the 2021, 2022 academic, well, if that's academic year that you're going to be attending college, you're going to be filling out the 2021, 2022 FAFSA. It's actually going to use tax information from 2019, 2 years prior. And so that's why you fill out the FAFSA. You'd fill it out that first year. You'd fill it out for subsequent years to continue being eligible for financial aid. So let's say you went to school for 4 years, you're going to fill it out 4 times. You go to graduate school, you spend another 2 years for your master's, you can fill it out 6 times. You go to community college, you probably fill it out 2 times, right? And so you're going to fill it out every year. That's a pretty common question. Now, the whole thing behind the FAFSA is to calculate this thing called the expected family contribution. And I like to tell families this is not a real number. This is not a real check that you're going to have to write out to a college anywhere. It's basically an indicator of your family's financial need for college. And so, as it says in the title, it's what the government would expect you to be able to pay towards college every year. So for some families, this might be $2,000 a year. For some families, this might be $70,000 a year. But it depends on all the information that you're putting into the FAFSA, what your EFC is. EFC, just an indicator of how much need you have to go towards college. What's reported in the FAFSA? Generally speaking, it's going to be your income. That income is going to be reported from that tax information 2 years prior. So for those of you that are filling it out for the upcoming academic year, the 2021, 2022 academic year, that have seniors, for instance, it's going to be from 2019 taxes. It's also going to look at your assets. And a lot of times the assets, the FAFSA is going to ask for their balance as of the day that you submit the FAFSA. So it's going to, for instance, let's say a checking account is something that it will ask about. It will say, what's the balance in your checking and savings accounts as of today? And so you're going to report that number. You'd log into your banking institution, your credit institution, credit union institution, whatever that looks like, and you'd report that balance. You're also going to need an FSA ID. So an FSA ID is, think of it as your entry credentials to get into the FAFSA. So your student's going to have to use it to actually get in. It's also your electronic signature. And so you have to sign the FAFSA at the end. Parents also have to sign if they've inputted parental information for a dependent student. We'll get to that here in a second. You're going to need an FSA ID to get into the FAFSA and to sign it to get out and to submit it. So FSA ID is really important. You get it from studentaid.gov/FSA ID. And so that's how you will apply for that. Again, student will need it. If parent information is reported, one of the parents will need it as well. All right, so now we're to the FAFSA. We've gotten the background. Now we're actually ready to go through it step by step. So here we go. Here's the login page. So when you go to that link that I put in several slides ago, by the way, I'm going to make these slides available. If you'd like to download it and look at all these links and use them in my slide deck, you're more than welcome, and definitely happy for you to do that. But this is what the entry page to the FAFSA looks like. So it's going to say, hey, you're here to complete the FAFSA form. Are you new to the process, or are you a returning user? So first year, if your kid's a senior and you're filling it out now, you're probably going to be new to the FAFSA process, right? So you click that button. If this is maybe your sophomore, junior, and senior year, and you're filling it out for the second, third, or fourth time, you'd probably return as a returning user, and you would use your credentials. So, by the way, keep that information for future years as you go through college. When you log in, you'll get to this page, and it's going to say, "Hey, are you a student, or are you a parent, or a preparer, or other things?" And so in most cases, if you're the student, you're obviously going to go in as the student. You're going to enter your FSA ID. You'll be into the application. But sometimes you're a parent and you're maybe putting in your portion of the form, or you're guiding your student through the process, or you're even spearheading the process. By the way, keep in mind, this is the student's form. It's their responsibility. But you would enter through the second gate, which is parent, preparer, or student from a freely associated state. So if you click that you're a student, you're going to use your FSA ID and the password, and that will get you into the system. If you're a parent, it actually doesn't ask for your FSA ID. It's going to ask for information about your student. And you're like, well, wait, why? Well, again, this is the student's form. They're the ones that this is about. It's about them going to college. They are going to be adults when they go to college. And so in the government's eyes, the FAFSA is a student form. It's not a parent form. They may ask for parent information, but the student is in the driver's seat. And so it's going to ask you as the parent to put in first name, last name, social security number, and your student's date of birth. And that's actually how you're going to enter the FAFSA, not with your FSA ID. It's going to be about information from your student, right? Then you'll get a disclaimer. And by the way, it looks like it's getting darker outside, so I may have to go turn on the light, but it looks like we're okay for now. Disclaimer will be the next thing that you'll see. So you'll have to accept that in order to enter. And then I had mentioned that the FAFSA that you want to fill out is named after the academic year that you're going to attend. So college is typically based in most cases like on fall semester, and then a spring semester, and then a summer semester. And so you would start school in the fall, typically in September or August or somewhere along there. You'd go for the fall semester, spring semester, and then summer, and then you would exit for summer, or you would come back for the next year. And so let's say you have a senior right now. So they are in 2020. In the current academic year, we're looking at 2020, 2021, and they're going to graduate in May of 2021. Well, then they're going to go off to college in the fall. So that actually starts the college year is going to be 2021, and then spring will be 2022. And so it's the 2021-2022 school year when they're going to college. And so in that scenario, if you have a senior student right now, you're going to be filling out the 2021-2022 FAFSA that you see here on the left of your screen. And that's an important distinction, because if you click the 2020-2021, which is this academic year in college, and you would do that if you wanted to aid now and you were going to school now, you're going to be filling out the wrong FAFSA, and you're going to have to go back and fill out the other one. So keep that in mind. You're going to be filling it out for the year that your kid is going to college. Okay. So in most cases, if you have a senior in college, it's going to be 2021-2022 FAFSA. So we'll click on that one, and that will lead us to a save key. So if you decide to leave the FAFSA, it'll actually keep your information for 45 days. But in order to get back in, you're going to need this save key. And if you want to know what the requirements are for your save key, I will introduce these at this moment. So these little question marks are icons that give additional information. So if you ever get to a question, you're like, man, I don't really understand this. I need more information. Click on the helper icons. These are your best friend. And I'm actually going to show you some text from helper icons here in a bit. But for instance, you're like, what does my save key need to be? How many characters? Is it numbers or letters? Well, it gives you the information that you need to fill that out right here. So you set a save key, and you will go on to a frequently asked questions section. You're more than welcome to read through this if you'd like. You can also skip it and go next. All right, so at this point, I'm going to explain how I'm going to go from here. So there's kind of two ways to fill out the FAFSA. The first is you're a dependent student, which is actually the steps that I'm going to lead you through. And this would generally, the scenario here would be you're a senior student in high school, and you're about ready to go off to college, and you live with your parents, and they help support you. In that scenario, generally you're going to be a dependent student, meaning that the FAFSA is going to ask for your financial information and your general information, but they're also going to ask for your parents, because in their mind, again, we're thinking like the government, they would say your parents are probably going to help give you assistance to go to college. And so they want to know about your parents' finances, their income and assets. For some of you, and I will actually show you these criteria here in a bit, maybe you're an older student, or maybe you have a kid, maybe you're married, maybe you're a veteran. In those type of scenarios, you're actually going to be an independent student, which is not what exactly the scenario that I'm going to walk through in this slide deck, but you'll still get a very good understanding of the FAFSA, what you're going to have to fill out. The difference for you is you're just not going to put parent information, because again, from the eyes of the government, there's no parent supporting you. You are your own parent. You're supporting children. You're a veteran. You've already maybe toured the world and you've come back to go to college. And so you don't have to report your financial information for your parents. It's just you. And that's what the government cares about, is your financial situation. So I'll show you those here in a bit. But we're going to go through that scenario where it's a student and we're reporting parental information. All right, so now we are in the FAFSA. We are in the application. And so I like to stop here and just give us a roadmap of where we're going to go, because that's what you're seeing on your screen. So the first section is student demographics. We're going to actually see things like what you see here on the screen, just name, where's your address, what's your social security number, all that type of stuff. Then we're going to move on to school selections. So this is actually, we're going to tell the FAFSA what schools you want this information reported to. And so this would be your school list, right? That we talked about earlier. Then maybe you want to go to Johnson County Community College, or maybe you want to go to K-State, maybe you want to go to Rockhurst, whatever that looks like for you, you're going to put those schools here. And that's telling the FAFSA, this is who I want you to send this information to. Then you're going to go to dependency status, which is where the application is going to ask you those questions to figure out if you're a dependent student or an independent student. And so we'll talk about those questions and go through that. Then we go to parent demographics. If you're reporting parent information, you're going to have to do some information about them. When were they married? What are their names? Where do they live? And then we're going to go to parent financials. And this is where we're going to start gathering income and asset information for the parents. Then we're going to move to student financials. So we're going to get income and asset information for the student. It may not be much if you have a senior student, but they're going to ask these questions. And then we're going to sign and submit it. Again, that's where we're going to pull out the FSA ID. We're going to sign it at that point, and then you'll have a confirmation screen. So that's the roadmap of where we're going. We're going to step through each of these step by step, hence the name, step by step through the FAFSA. All right, so let's take a deep breath. Here we go. First is student demographics. And so we are going to start putting in demographic information for the student. Again, this is the student's form. So we start here, we're driving through the information section for the student. First, it's going to be social security number, then first name, middle name, last name, and date of birth for the student. And by the way, some of these things will be grayed out because maybe the FAFSA already knows the information. And so we'll see sometimes these are grayed out. If you see that in real life, that just means the FAFSA has already logged that from previous things that you've submitted, and it's ready to go to the next thing. And these won't be editable when they're in that case. Then you're going to do the student email address. This is important. The Department of Education does communicate through this email address. For instance, it will give you a confirmation saying your FAFSA has been processed. Congratulations. That goes to the email address that you're putting here. So email address, phone number, make sure these are things that you check. Then it's going to ask for your permanent mailing address. Again, if you're a student, a senior student, it's probably going to be your parents' address. It's where you live, so you're going to put that in. Then it's going to ask if you've lived at this address or in that state that that address is in for at least 5 years. And you might kind of be like, why? That's a weird question to ask. Well, the reason why I'd ask this question is because you might be familiar with something called in-state and out-of-state tuition. And so if you're at a state school, like let's say a KU, a K-State, or a Mizzou, or a Missouri State on the Missouri side, they have different tuitions that they charge depending on if you're a citizen of that state or not, because those institutions have a vested interest in educating their own citizenry of that state. And so essentially why you're putting this in here is because most states will consider you a resident if you've lived there for at least 5 years. This is kind of a catch-all. And so the FAFSA is essentially trying to catch all or figure out if you're a bona fide resident of the state that you just put the address for. And that will help with things like calculating in-state, out-of-state tuition. It'll ask if you're a US citizen, or again, we'd mentioned eligible non-citizen might be the case for you. And so we, at this point, we'll probably get the FAFSA telling us, hey, here's your state application. Again, I mentioned that sometimes the state uses the FAFSA for its information for state aid, and sometimes you have to fill something else out. And so this will give you, this is talking about Iowa in this case. This is just an example, by the way. It'll say, hey, you start your state application link to transfer your information from your state. So it sounds like Iowa and the FAFSA talk, and so that's a good thing. So that'll give you some information here. At this point, you're going to talk about high school completion status and what degree or certificate you'll be working on when you're in college, and what's your status, your college status, if you've ever taken any college classes before. Again, you're filling this out every year, so this may change over time. But let's say high school diploma, then you're working on your first bachelor's degree, and that has implications for aid. And so bachelor's degree, or maybe you're working on an associate's degree, a 2-year degree at community college. Then you're going to go to what level, college level, are you going to be looking at in, let's say, the 2021-2022 school year. This is an important one. So let's say your student has taken some dual credit in high school. They are still a never attended college first-year freshman. So that's an important distinction here. Maybe your kid has taken enough credits to be considered a sophomore. They're still, for the cases of the FAFSA, still never attending college first year. So keep that in mind. Don't mess up there. This is one of those common areas that families can make an error. And then it asks if you're interested in being considered for work study. This isn't binding. So generally I would tell families to put yes here just to see if you're eligible or not. You can always reject it at a later time if you don't want to do work study. Then it's going to ask if you're male or female. And this is important because it's going to start asking about selective service. And the current law in the United States is that males have to register for selective service. By the way, if you're not registered for selective service, FAFSA will actually give you an option to register at this point. And so that's an important thing. If you do select male, you'll be given that option, or you do have to report whether you're registered with a selective service or not. If you're female, it's not applicable. Then it asks for a driver's license. You don't have to put this information if you don't want to, but you're welcome to do that if you have one and you want to provide that information. It's going to ask if you're a foster youth or in the foster care system. Then it's going to ask for the highest school completion status of your parents. So did they go to high school? Did they go to college? Have they gone beyond college? That type of thing. And you would report that here. This doesn't affect aid. It's, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, just gathered for statistical purposes. And that's the first section. So, hey, we're done with one section. I'm going to take a drink of water. You can tell I get excited about the FAFSA. I'm probably one of the few people that gets excited about the FAFSA. Hey, how about that? All right, so school selection. So this is where I mentioned you're going to put in the schools that are on your school list to go to for college that you want to receive this information. And so you're going to first report your school. And so you can put the name of your high school, the city, the state. It's going to look it up in a database. And so you'll select it out of a database, and that will report what high school you're coming from. Then we're going to start listing schools. And so there's two ways to list schools. And you don't have to really worry about this because probably the simplest way is just to look it up by city and state. It's going to be in a database. And so if I wanted to go to Missouri State, I could say Springfield, Missouri, and I could look it up in the database. I could select it, just go from there. But there is a second option. It's called a federal school code. And so a lot of times these are listed on the school's website, and you can put in a number. I'm just making one up, like 467923. And it will say, oh, well, that's Rockhurst University, select this. And so you can also do it by the federal school code, but don't have to worry too much about that. Just do city and state if you're unsure. And so you'll pick it, and you can even see here, University of Iowa, their federal school code is 001892. So if you knew that number, you could use that instead. By the way, you can add up, as it says here, 10 schools to your FAFSA application. If you need to add more than that, you submit the FAFSA, you go in and correct this at a later time. So let's say you have 20 schools on your list. You would just need to submit it, make sure it processes. At that point, this information is sent to the schools. You can go back in and resubmit it with a new school list. It will also ask you your housing plans for the schools that you list. The reason why it does that is because this helps the school calculate the full cost of attendance that's used in all these financial aid calculations. And so, for instance, if I were to go across the street, I live very close to Johnson County Community College. If I were to go across the street or send my kids there, I can't live on campus. They don't have residence halls. And so my cost to go to Johnson County Community College is going to be less than if I were to go and pay to live somewhere on campus. So you're going to have to put how you want to live or not live on campus. That helps them with some of these calculations. All right, so we're down with another section here. It may take you a bit longer if you have a lot of schools to list, but that's a pretty simple one. All right, so now we move on to dependency status. And this is where I, again, had mentioned that the FAFSA application is going to start weeding out whether it needs your parents' information or not. In other words, are you a dependent student and you need to report your parents' information, or are you considered an independent student and you don't have to report your parents' information? And so all these questions are the criteria, which, by the way, I'm saying dependent. but don't think dependent in terms of taxes. That's a totally different criteria system. It's a totally different system. So don't think just because they're dependent on my tax return, that's not the same criteria the FAFSA is using. So don't just automatically assume that they're equal, because actually they may not be. And so don't make that mistake as well. So now it's going to start asking those questions. So first is it asks, are you married? Because if you're married, you're considered independent. So you would put, no, I'm single, or I'm married, etc. It's going to say, do you have children that receive support from you? Yes or no. Do you have other dependents that receive more than half their support from you? Yes or no. Then you have maybe some, and these are kind of in checkbox format because they may not be as common as the ones we just saw. But are you a veteran of the armed forces? Are you currently serving? Have you been emancipated? Or are you a ward of the court? A number of less common situations that would still make you potentially independent in terms of the FAFSA. It's also going to ask if you're homeless or at risk of being homeless. So you would answer yes or no there. Excuse me. After that, you're going to get a screen saying, okay, this means you're a dependent student or you are an independent student. And so here's the dependent student. I actually thought I had the independent student one. That's why I went to the next slide. But dependent student, so it says, hey, well, then you have to submit parent information. And so you would say, yes, I'm going to provide parent information, or I'm unable to. If you're unable to, there are some options, but it may limit your financial aid that you're able to receive. So most are going to put, I can provide my parents' information, and they're going to move on. So it says, hey, congratulations. You have to enter parent information. So we're to our next section, which is parent demographics. And so you're going to start entering in information like, are your parents married? Are they remarried? When did they get married or remarried? Then it's going to ask for social security number, parent last name, first initial, date of birth, parent's email address. By the way, it only asks for first initial. I don't know why. That is a little strange, and I don't have an answer for you. It's just what they ask. And so you only have to put the first initial for the parents. That's not the case for the students. Then you're going to enter a social security number, last name, first initial, date of birth if you have multiple parents, and you will move on. Again, they will ask you if you've lived in Iowa or at whatever your state is for at least 5 years. We've already discussed that one. Then it's going to calculate your household size based on information that you put previously. So it's going to say, hey, you have 2 parents and you have yourself. So that's 3 in your household. But then it's going to ask, do your parents have other children? If so, put them here. Do they have people that live with your parents, or you provide more than half their support? Your parents provide more than half their support. You might have other people, so you may list more. Then you're also going to list the number in college. And this is important in particular because this has financial aid implications. Because as you might imagine, if you have 2 in college, you have more need to go to college in terms of finances. So this is factored into that EFC calculation that we had talked about earlier. So it correctly says this is how many are in the household, and we have a good picture of that. And then, hey, that's it. We're on to the last 3 sections. Can you believe that? It's gone pretty quick. And now we get to the part that I think strikes fear in the heart of people that fill out the FAFSA. So we're going to start talking about finances. But I can tell you it has been vastly simplified over the years. And many families are actually able to report a lot of the tax information, for instance, which causes people a lot of fear, directly from the IRS. So that's a really great thing through the IRS data retrieval tool. We're going to look at that here in a few seconds. But it's vastly simplified. So take a deep breath. We're going to get through this. Here we go. So the first thing it's going to ask is, hey, did the parents file a tax return? And you're going to say, yes, we already did, or no, we haven't, etc. It's going to say, what type of tax return? Was it a 1040 or was it some other form? Then it's going to say, hey, what's a tax filing status? By the way, if you're like, I don't even know what this stuff is, it's all listed on your tax return. So if you went to H&R Block, or you had a tax person do it, or you maybe did it yourself, just pull out those tax forms. All this is really, the tax form is going to be in the corner of that tax form that you filled out and submitted to the IRS. It's also going to list what filing status you had. So let's say it was married, filing joint, or had a household, or single. You'll put that here. Based on what you just put, it's going to say, hey, you might want to use the IRS data retrieval tool. And I would highly, if you're eligible, and some families are not, for instance, if you filed married filing separate, which is it happens sometimes, you wouldn't be eligible for this IRS data retrieval tool. But if you are, you would click link to the IRS. You'd put some additional information. You'd go to the IRS's website. You would confirm some information that's listed on your tax return, and then you can import this stuff directly from the IRS. How cool is that? You don't have to calculate lines anymore. You don't have to find it on your tax return and try to type it in correctly. All this stuff is done for you automatically. So that is a huge, huge benefit. It eliminates a lot of error situations and things like that. So hopefully you'll be eligible for that, but some of you will not be. If that is the case, you should definitely click on these help icons. They will guide you through directly where you need to go on your tax return. For instance, the next question is, what is your parents' adjusted gross income for 2019? Well, it says, hey, this is found on your 1040 line 8B. And so when you go to your 1040 tax return, you'd look at that line and you would report that number. But sometimes, in a lot of cases, this is going to be reported directly from the IRS. It may ask you, hey, how much is spouse one's income versus spouse two's income? But generally, that's going to be reported. And hey, speak of that, here we go. So parent one, how much did they earn from working? And so you would maybe go to your W-2s, or you'd look at your income statements. What about parent two? And so you kind of have to split up what was made between each parent. Then you're going to go into some situations where you may have to report some additional information. So, for instance, are you on some type of government assistance program like SNAP or SSI or Medicaid? You would answer some of these questions. Then it's going to say how much tax did you pay. Again, this could be directly imported from the IRS, but if it's not, you'd have to do a little calculation here. You'd go to line 14, line or schedule 2, line 2, minus schedule 2, line 2. And so again, you may have to do some calculations, but again, the IRS data retrieval tool makes this vastly simplified. Then for anybody, whether you reported this from the IRS data retrieval tool or not, you're going to have to answer essentially no, or put zeros, or put some information into some boxes that ask you about untaxed income situations, because it's pulled all your information from your tax returns. So now it's saying we also want to know about these areas that may not be reflected in your tax return. That's essentially what the government is saying here. And so it's things like combat pay or special pay. And by the way, these are unique situations or more specialized situations. And so it's not uncommon for families to go through this and be like, none of this applies. And then you would just have all zeros. But if it does apply to you, you would have to do some calculations here or report some numbers here. So it could be things like if you have tax exempt interest, or if you have IRA deductions and payments from some qualified plans, or from some SEP and Simple, or those type of plans. So again, these may not be applicable to you, but they might be. Child support, did you receive any child support? Earnings from work by a cooperative education program, et cetera. And again, if you have any questions about these specifically, you're like, I don't even know what that means, click on these little helper icons. A lot of times that will guide you through, give you some more information that will make you think, oh, well, yeah, no, that doesn't apply to me. I just didn't know what that was, right? So that's a good place to use those helper icons. A few more here, things like child support, housing, food, or other living allowance payments, tax deferred pension and retirement savings plans. By the way, I do see this sometimes. Families have these where you have to go as on your W-2 and just look at the boxes here. So 12A through 12D, do you have any of these codes? D, E, F, G, H, or S? So you'd look at your W-2s, see if that's the case. If it is, you'd have to report some information here. But again, for a lot of families, this doesn't apply. Veterans, untaxed income that's not reported. And so that's the untaxed section. That one, again, more specialized situations, certainly doesn't apply to many families. All right, now we get to a point where we've changed a little bit. Whether you realize it or not, we've come to kind of a new section of the FAFSA that we need to talk about. So what we've done so far was looking at those income tax returns from 2 years prior. So if you were looking at 2021, 2022 FAFSA, would be reporting information from year 2019. Well, the thing is when it comes to assets, the government wants to know what you have now, not in 2019, but they want to know now. And so the questions switch. to ask that. And it happens at this moment. It says, do you want to skip questions about your parents' assets? And actually, sometimes the FAFSA is kind of a smart form. Sometimes it will say, do your parents have assets above this number, this amount? And you would answer yes or no. But this is where it's going to ask for things like checking and savings accounts. And so it says, as of today, what's your parents' total current balance of check or cash, savings, and checking accounts? And so you would, again, log into your banking institutions, report those numbers. Then it says, as of today, what's the net worth of your parents' investments, including real estate, not your parents' home? And so one of the things I want you to, if you remember nothing from this presentation, remember this. You need to click on this helper icon for this question, because I don't want you reporting investments that the FAFSA does not want you to report. Specifically, a lot of retirement accounts are things that probably should not be reported. Again, you have to look at your specific situation. I don't want to give you specific advice for your situation. I want you to look at this guidance that the FAFSA asks. You really need to pay attention on this one. You don't want to penalize your kid by reporting something that shouldn't be reported. And so again, these are actually known as question 89 and question 41, because we're going to have this question for the student as well. And so here are some links to the guidance, but if you're in the FAFSA, you can actually just click on this little question icon and it will give you this guidance. But I just want to be clear, again, if you remember nothing from this presentation, remember on this question to look through what's included and what's not, because you don't want to report things here that shouldn't be reported. Okay, so that's one of the biggest error areas that I see from families over and over and over, reporting things that shouldn't be reported here. Okay. And then as of today, what's the net worth of your parents' current business or investment farms? Again, here, very big exclusion. Read on, it says, don't include a family farm or family business with 100 or fewer full-time equivalent employees. So we're talking about 100 or less employees. That's a huge exclusion. And so you also don't want to be reporting a business here if you don't have to. Okay. So a few things there to be aware of, to be cognizant of when you're filling out the form. So the dreaded question 89 or 41, check the guidance. That's my piece for you there. And then we're on to student. So the cool thing here is you might be like, oh man, more financial questions. But the funny thing is it's just going to ask the same questions, but now we're talking about the student instead of the parents. And again, if you're an independent student, this is the only section you'd have to fill out, right? So this gets a lot easier because we're going to go through the same questions. Tax return, what type of tax return, filing status, linking to the IRS, going through and talking about adjusted gross income. Again, a lot of this stuff is reported from the IRS data retrieval tool if you choose to use it. What did you earn from working? Amount of tax paid. Then those untaxed income sections. Again, same stuff. Then we go to the assets for the student. And so they're going to have to look at, as of today, what's in cash, savings, checking accounts. Do you have any investments as of today? As of today, do you have a net worth in a business or a farm? Same questions. And by the way, same errors here. So again, check that guidance to see what's included and what's not. Then congratulations, you're done, which is great. Well, you're not technically done. We still got to sign the puppy, but we are to the end of the FAFSA. And so again, I hope you've got to this point and thinking, wow, that wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be. I can do this. So the first question it's going to ask is, do you have a preparer? And by the way, for purposes of this video, I'm not paid. I'm here to guide you. So I'm not your preparer. So don't list Jason Anderson here. I'm just here to guide you through this process. And many similar presentations are happening around the nation on the FAFSA. And so I'm just a guide. I'm not a preparer in this use case. So you would typically put no there unless you did pay somebody to help guide you through this. Then it's going to give you a confirmation of all the data that you put into the FAFSA. It's going to continue through that, and then you'll be asked to sign. And so the student will definitely have to sign. Of course, they're always reporting information, and they're going to provide a signature. And so it's going to ask you to read and certify some certifications, some disclosures here. Then you're going to sign the FAFSA, and you will do that using your FSA ID. Then the parent has to go in and sign, and if parent information is reported, and it will have to be one of the parents that will provide a signature. And so they will sign as parent one or parent two. And you will go in, read the same disclosures and agree, and you'll use your FSA ID to sign the FAFSA. By the way, there are a few other options here, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend them unless you just have a real good reason to do this. But you can just say, hey, I'm not gonna sign right now. Or you can say, I'll print a signature page and I'll send it in. It's just gonna delay. You can ink a signature and send it in. That's totally acceptable, but it will delay the processing of your FAFSA. So signing electronically is certainly the easiest and probably the quickest way to get it done. And then you'll submit the FAFSA and you're done. There's some good information here. For instance, I told you that it will calculate your EFC. Well, it actually does that automatically. Now, granted, this may not be your final EFC. You may have to do some corrections and some things like that, but it says, hey, this is your EFC, 2,592. So you can actually see it directly when you fill out your FAFSA and you submit it. And then again, it will process and there will be some finalizing pieces here, but it does give you a preliminary one in any case. Then it'll give you some information from the college scorecard on the schools that you've listed in the FAFSA. This is really good information as well. So you'll want to review that if that's of interest. Some families ask, hey, what do I do if I need to go in and correct my form? I screwed up. I did something wrong. I talked to a friend and they said, oh, what? You did what? You shouldn't have done that. And so you're like, oh man, I got to go in and correct. Or if you want to add or delete schools, that type of thing will also be a correction. So what you do is you would sign in, and once you're signed in, you'll get some options to make FAFSA corrections. And so you would click on that, you would make your corrections, and you would resubmit the FAFSA. So that's one big question that I get. The other question, well, actually, a lot of families don't know to ask this question, but you get at the end of the FAFSA something called a student aid report. And so when your FAFSA processes, this is kind of that final confirmation that it's processed, you're good to go. Well, I say good to go. Sometimes, again, your school might ask for additional things, but you at that point will get what's called a student aid report. And it's essentially a confirmation sheet that looks a lot like this. That's, again, reconfirming all the things that you put in the FAFSA, reconfirming what you might be eligible for and some additional information. So that's the student aid report. So what's next? When you get the student aid report and your FAFSA has been confirmed and kind of finalized, at that point, the information is also sent to your schools in a different report called an ISA report. Now, you don't need to know what an ISA report is, but it's essentially that information getting sent to those schools. Then those schools, as a steward for the government, starts compiling all the governmental aid and all the aid that they're going to give you, things like scholarships, and they're going to put it into a final package called a financial aid letter. They're going to send it to you if you have a traditional student that's going like a senior in high school. They're going to send it right around this time and into kind of, well, sorry, not around this time. I forget I'm in fall and it's dark, by the way. But in the spring is when these would typically go out. And this is when they're going to say, hey, this is all the aid that you're given from the school, from the government. This is the full cost of our institution. And this is essentially what you might have to pay as a differential, if there is any. And so this is the only time I like to say college is a lot like a used car lot. This is the only time that you'll really know what the school's going to cost you after all your financial aid. By the way, if you want kind of to put yourself in the future and figure out what people in your income bracket might pay to go to certain schools, each school puts on their website called a net price calculator. And you can do that based on your situation to try to figure out what it might cost to go to that college. Additional resources. Now, these are things to mark. If you'd printed out my slides, I would say, hey, star this one. If you need help throughout this process, the Department of Education is awesome. And they provide you some amazing resources to get you through this process. The first is a hotline. Call it. Really, these people are very helpful. Hey, I'm not sure if this investment should be reported. Give them a call, 1-800-4FED-AID. It's 1-800-433-3243. Excellent resource. Please reach out to them if you have questions. Then studentaid.gov is the best website on all things financial aid. Check that out too. Great website. And you can always reach out to me too. Again, Jason Anderson, I run a firm called GradMetrics, and my cell phone is here. You can call or text that. You can also email me at jason@gradmetrics.com. By the way, I mentioned some printed slides, And so if you're interested in getting those, you can go to gradmetrics.com/workshops. Right there, I've got a PDF of the slides. You can download that for your use. There's also other workshops that I've done in communities and in high schools across the nation, well, here locally mostly, on that website. But I have done some other workshops outside of that area. But in any case, you can download those as well at that point, totally for free. So it's been good being here with you. Happy to take questions if there are any, but I think we're actually going to wrap this one up. It's been a good ride. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you for all of those insightful tips and resources and wonderful information on how to fill out the FAFSA. From here, we are going to share an additional library resource with you that can also help with the FAFSA. So I am going to now share my screen, and I will show you how you can access this resource with your library card information. Not that one. Let me find the right one. Let's see. Here we go. All right. So if you go to the Kansas City Public Library main page, so kclibrary.org, and if you go to resources and research, if you go to the letter B, the resource I'm going to share with you is called BrainFuse. So if you go to the letter B here, you scroll down and you'll find BrainFuse right here. It's also a tutoring resource. So if you need information or assistance with tutoring, it has some really great resources there as well. If you have any essays that you need to write, if you're allowed to get assistance with those, this could be a really good resource as well. They have a writing tool or a writing assistance platform as well. So we're going to click on more information here, and then it gives you information here about the different kind of facets of BrainFuse. And so they have homework help, writing assistance, collaboration tools, and then you can connect with live tutors between 2 and 11 p.m. So to access BrainFuse outside of the Kansas City Public Library, you will need your library card number and your 4-digit PIN. So we'll click on Access BrainFuse. And then from there, I'm just going to use my card information. And then the 4-digit PIN. Log in. Once we're logged in, it's going to give you a breakdown of the different options that are available here. And so again, you can see there's live tutoring, writing lab. You can get tutoring in anything from math, science. There are foreign language services available on here as well. So all sorts of different things. So right down here is where the featured FAFSA Live Help is. So we're going to go ahead and click on that featured service. And then you can just select on this drop-down menu, FAFSA Assistance, and then click Get Live Help. And then what it's going to do is it's going to connect you with a tutor. And so I won't go through the entire tutor process, but it allows you to, you can type and show on the screen, you can chat with them here and connect with them to get some good additional assistance with the FAFSA. And that is a resource that is free from the Kansas City Public Library.
That's great.
Thanks, Jason. So I'm just going to wrap up here. If you need additional assistance, feel free always to reach out to me. My name is Rhiannon, and I work for the library. I'm the Career Resources and Financial Literacy Resource Librarian at the Kansas City Public Library. I do one-on-one consultations with folks, connecting them with information and resources to help them achieve their career or financial goals. So we are really thrilled that you were able to join us for this topic tonight. If you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out and contact us. And we look forward to connecting with you soon. All right, thanks and take care.
Good night.